Sure. Go ahead.
Okay, it's ready?
It's working, yeah.
My name is Sam Kranc, and I live in the United States in Connecticut. This tape is about my life, that I was born in Poland, but this tape is taped in Jerusalem at my son's apartment, my son's house. His name is Moshe Kranc. I'll
And
start
we're
with
waiting
my-
for Elise to give birth.
And I'll start with my birthplace, which is the city of Zamość in eastern Poland. That's where I was born and raised. At a young age, I had to go and help my father in his business. In 1939,
Before we get to 1939, tell me about how the Buba inside him.
okay,
Tell me about how Buba inside him.
this is all on the tape now.
Fine, it's okay.
My father and mother get married, and it was a shadchan marriage. My father sent a shadchan to my mother's father, and that's how the marriage started. We were a family of 4 sons and 1 sister. And since my sister was the oldest, but I was the oldest son. And as usual, the oldest son had to help the family with the business, and I did. I was a young boy, I went to school, then I helped my father.
Tell me something about school.
At school,
Because I saw you
the
when you went to
majority
school.
was Polish children. However, there was a lot of Jewish children. As a matter of fact, when it came to religion, 2 classes of Jewish children get together, and we had our Jewish religion hour. And the Polish had their religion hour. And the school was very good. It was discriminated, it was felt, but not terribly. And after I finished school, I started working with my father.
Did you go to Cheder too?
I went to Haida too. That's where I got my religious education from Haida. From 8 to 1, we went to Polish school.
Don't rock so much, it's bad.
We went to Polish school. And then from 1:30 to 5 o'clock, we went to Haida.
That's a long time.
It's a long day, and that's what we did. And
Did everybody
Haida,
in the Cheder have books?
the Haida had books, and the Haida was a little bit different because there was only Jewish kids, and we got along fairly well, and we learned good. My youngest brother started going to Haida too, but I was the oldest.
Tell me about Shabbat. What did you do on Shabbat when you were a kid?
And at Shabbat,
Shabbos, excuse me.
at Shabbos, the whole city practically was closed up because practically all the stores belonged to Jews. And in Zamość at that time, all the Jews went to shul, regardless. And after shul, nobody went to work. It was a day of rest, the way it was prescribed and supposed to be.
Tell me what else you remember when you were a kid. What else did you do when you were a little kid? You used to go to the park in Zamość, right?
At Saturday, usually I would go with friends and my cousins. We lived in the new city, and the park was in the old city, and it was about 1 kilometer, a little over a kilometer to go to the park. We used to go, and there were nice places there. It was a beautiful park in Zamość, and we used to enjoy ourselves. Also, in Shabbos afternoon, a lot of people went spazieren, which means for a walk, and all over Zamość.
Did you feel a lot of anti-Semitism? Did you feel any anti-Semitism?
I felt anti-Semitism because everybody in Poland felt anti-Semitism, but as the time progressed, and I was a very young kid when Pilsudski died, and he was the president at that time. Under his leadership, the anti-Semitism was not felt as much as after his death. After his death, a person named Rich Schmigli assumed the presidency, and he was completely different at that time. Also at that time, the Nazis in Germany took over power, and we felt it. I remember I went with my father to the shul to say Tillim for the Jews in Germany. So we didn't know that the Germans, at that time, they were not killing Jews. However, they were discriminated, they were chased out of the country, they was robbed of all their possessions and also their positions.
You told me stories about your father and how honest he was in business.
My father was one of the most honest people I have ever met in all my life.
Really, a long time has passed since you...
There was never anything. I remember there were certain things. My father had 3 partners. There were 4 partners, partnership. And my father always was the one to sell the product. And the people that bought from him always were happy and always went back to buy from him. I remember one incident where one of his brothers said he wants to try to sell the merchandise. So my father said, okay. So he started selling it, and after a short period of time, he lost a lot of customers, and he asked my father to take back this position. And my father did without any complaints.
What else do you want to remember? What else do you want to tell me about when you were a little kid?
I had a lot of friends at that time, and we went together, and sometimes at that time in the early 30s, the anti-Semitism was not that widely spread, that I was afraid to walk at night or go wherever I wanted or even do whatever I wanted. There was anti-Semitism, but not widely spread. However, as the 30s progressed in Germany, started discriminating and taking Jews to concentration camps, we all knew about it, and so did the Polish people and the Polish government. And it started spreading in the Polish cities. In Zamość at that time, it was already danger to go late at night from the new Zamość to the old Zamość, or from the old Zamość to the new Zamość. But we still managed. And then I grew up and I got a little older, and in the 1938 there was a lot of talk about a war. But people went on with their business and their livelihood as they usually did. But I was still listening to people talking about what's going to happen.
Can you tell me about the other relatives who were living around? I know that your mother's father was living with you.
At that time, my grandfather, my mother's father, was living with us. That was the tradition in the old country. My mother was the youngest daughter, And when the youngest daughter got married, the father, if there was no mother, lived with her. If there was a father and mother, they lived together in an apartment. And my grandfather was with us all the time.
What was his name?
His name was Avram Yitzchok Schwarzberg. And at that time, we came closer and closer, and there was more talk about a war. Finally, in 1939, the war started. Germany invaded Poland. And it was on a Saturday that the Germans bombed Zamość. Mostly what they bombed was the Jewish sectors. As a tradition, or as a rule, the Jews had lived in sectors and in separation from the Poles. So there was no big argument that they bombed all the Jewish sectors. Luckily, our family was not home at that Shabbos. But our houses, because we lived and my grandfather's estate, which at that estate was living 3 uncles and my mother and our family. All that burned down from bombs at that time and that Saturday. Luckily, we built another house in 1938. But we didn't move in yet. This house was supposed to be for my sisters, Anaden they called it, and for us to live there. So when we came back and all this burned down, we moved into our new house, which was built in 1938. I remember vividly when the Germans came into Poland, because this house was divided in 2 parts. One was made an Essig fabrik,
Business?
a factory to make Essig. Vinegar. And the other was living quarters. So a German officer came in, and the other side, the vinegar side, where they made the vinegar, was closed. And I was there. And he told me he wanted me to open the door. But I did not have any key, and I could not open the door.
Hello? Ken? אני לא יכול לדבר. Okay.
So I told them, and I didn't understand German, so I told them I have no key. So he hit me, and he told me, now I understand a little bit of German. He told me if I'm not going to open this door, he's going to break it down. He wants to know, because there was a bottle filled with vinegar, and he thought it's something else. Finally, he pushed the door, and the door opened. And he went in, and he looked. There was boxes of vinegar packed and everything. He went around all the boxes. He smelled to them. He see what it is, and he went away. When they came in...
Did he know you were a Jew?
I don't think he knew that I was a Jew. The new house was between the section of the Jewish quarters and the Polish quarters. It was closer to the Polish quarter. After that, the Germans were with us for about 4 weeks. They robbed whatever they could, they took whatever they could, and then they announced that they're gonna pull out of this city because the Russians came in from the other side, and this city, which is called Zamość in eastern Poland, was going to go to the Russians. We didn't know what to expect. We were frightened enough. but we stayed and waited. Finally, they
Was there any opportunity to run away at that point? To run, well, there was, whichever way you
There
do
was
it.
no opportunity to go nowhere because the only way you could go is to the German side, because the Russians were coming in from the other side just with military, and there was no way of going anywhere. Finally, they moved out, and the Russians came in. That was another story because the Russians took what they could. But there was no danger at that time of being killed because the Russians, they took what they could, but they did not harm people.
Did the Germans harm people?
The Germans took people to work when they were there. The Russians did not. So the Russians came in and they were with us 3 months in Zamość, and it starts slowing down a little bit everything, but there was no danger for Jews at that time. Then the Russians announced that they are going to move out because the boundary have shifted and the Germans are going to come back. So at that time, the Polish army came out of the woods. There's a lot of wooden land or wilderness around Zamość, especially wood. And they brought out horses and ammunition and everything else. So the Russians took away the ammunition. The horses, they said, whoever wants it can take him. I was already 18 years old. So I took horses and brought them into my father's place. When it was time to move out of Zamość, because when they announced they're going to leave, our family, especially my grandfather, I remember vividly my grandfather said, if you don't want to go, I am leaving with the Russians myself.
How old was he at that point?
At that point, he was in his very late 70s. So, because nobody wanted to leave a brand new house that they were just built and leave it. And then, as we seen that he is very serious, we decided to leave the house. All of this was thought that this is a temporarily leaving, that we're going to be back in a very short time, the war will end, and we're going to be back. So we all left with them horses that I brought in.
Came back in 52 years. We went back to the house in 91, no?
1946.
Ah, okay.
I was
All right.
there. So we left Zamość. A good portion of Jewish population at that time left Zamość because this was an occasion to leave the Germans behind. However, not everybody left. There was still a lot of Jews.
What percentage stayed?
I would estimate that 60% left and 40% stayed. I remember when we left, and then I went back with my father with a horse and buggy, and he said he has some business there to attend. And we went back. It was already a danger of doing that. It was already a danger of doing that because the Russians already was left. Only the Germans didn't come in yet. But we still made it. And we moved in the other side where the Russian part was supposed to be with our family.
Before we leave Zamość, you were 18 years old.
You were 19 years.
19 years old.
Oh, wait a minute, I was born 22, 39, 17 years old.
Did you have a girlfriend? 17 years old is old enough.
I'm there.
I know you're, it's on tape, I'm asking you.
No.
No, not for the record?
No.
17 is old enough to have a girlfriend.
No, I did not.
Okay.
When we left, we rode as far
You know, let's stop for a minute and get to you. Get rid of the Hila. Okay, pick it up.
I was born in March 1922. So I was 17 years old when all this happened. After we left, we went to a city called Brod. There we stayed for...
Brod is in what, right? White Russia?
Brod was in Polish Ukrainian. We stayed there for a little while, and finally the Russians told us, whoever wants to go to Russia can register and go to Russia. We worked in the woods supplying firewood for people, and that's how we lived there and survived at that city. After that,
Were there Jews from all over
there was,
your part of
but
Poland?
there was more Jews that came into that city. We weren't the only one. There was quite a bit of Jews that came in from the other side. After a long debate, again I'll go to my grandfather. He had decided, or influenced, not decided, that it would be a good idea to register and to go away because he feared that the war is not over. Even though the Germans captured Poland, that war will continue. So we decided to register, and we registered, and we went away to Russia. When we arrived in Russia, we did not know where we're going. We did not know what we're going to do. But at the same time, we knew what the Germans do to Jews.
How did you know already?
Because as I said before, we set tilling for the German Jews 2 years before, and it got worse and worse and worse. The anti-Semitism in Poland progressed so rapidly. And when we left Zamość and went through Tomaszów Lubelski, the Poles already opened almost every store that belonged to a Jews and were robbing them. So we've seen what is happening, and we decided to register and to go to Russia. We came into Russia in Odessa Oblast.
Oblast is a province.
Oblast is a province, yes.
Like a county.
Not a county. Oblast is a lot bigger than a
Okay,
country.
fine.
And what they brought us in was a disaster. It was a big collective pig farm. And
Kolkhoz?
it was called a sovkhoz. The difference between a kolkhoz and a sovkhoz is the sovkhoz worked for money. The kolkhoz worked for products that came from the ground or whatever they specialized in. It was very new for us. It was very humiliated for us just to work on a pig farm. However, we had no choice. We stayed there for a while and we worked. And then a Russian Jew came to this sovkhoz. His name was Kramer. And we get acquainted with him, and he talked to my father and he talked to me. At that time, me and my younger brother Eli went on courses to work on tractors. And we were at that courses at that time. And he suggested that my father and the rest of the family move to a city, a little town called Domaniovka. That's where he resides, and he'll give my father a job, and we will live better than here. However, me and my brother Eli could not go because we were registered to go on these courses to become mechanics and ride tractors. So we stayed, and our family moved out to the town called Domaniovka.
How far was it from where you went? From the...
It was about 15 to 20 kilometers from that sovkhoz, and it was about 100 kilometers from Odessa, but it was in Odessa Oblast. And after we finished the courses, we asked the Russians to let us go and visit our family. When we went there and visited our family, the Jews in this little town were very friendly, and Mr. Kramer himself said, "Don't go back. I will write a letter to them people, and I'm sure they will let you stay in this town with your family." We were very scared, but he made a few phone calls, telephone calls, and he told us we can stay at least for another while until it becomes official.
Mm-hmm.
So we stayed there, and it became official that we don't have to go back to this pig farm. My father had a job, they gave it to him. This guy, Mr. Kramer gave it to him, and it was in a cafeteria. And I got a job too. I was collecting wool for the government of Russia, from people, private people, and from kolkhoz, collective farms which had sheep. This was my job. I had to go out with a horse and buggy in the country and collect wool for that government. I was paid for that, and I worked there. I got very friendly with my superior son, which his name was Vala Adamovsky.
How did the people feel about having their wool collected? Did they want to have it collected?
The people that gave up wool to the government were reimbursed with materials from wool.
Uh-huh.
And all kind of materials, sweaters, even wool boots. Depends how much they decided to give up. Each person that lived in a kolkhoz, on a farm, had a right to keep 10 sheep for himself. Plus the collective farm kept hundreds and hundreds of. But when I went there, usually the collective farms brought in to the magazine their wool because it was a lot. But the individuals is the one that I had to go and pick him up and give him material from wool in exchange for it. And that was my job. I got very friendly with a lot of people, a lot of friends at my age, and it was not bad living there. In fact, it was comfortable living there. It was not any good living, but it was a lot better than being at the Germans. And I worked at this place until 1941. I came to this place in January 1940. I came to the Manyovka. In 1941, the 22nd of June, Germany invaded Russia. It was very shocking. It was very scary, but there was no place to go. And 1 month later, exactly 22nd of July 1941, I was drafted in the Russian army. At that day,
Not into a Polish brigade, but into the regular Russian.
the Russian army. At that time, about 2,000 of us. There was very few Jews, and there were some gypsies among us. Most of them was Ukrainian, because this Odessa belonged to Ukraine. There was Russian, all kind of nationalities, but there was only one friend from the Manyovki that went with me, a good friend. His name was Abrasha Podolsky.
Jew?
He was a Jewish boy, and he was a very good friend of mine. And we hauled together. I remember when I went in March. They didn't give us any trucks or any auto. We had to walk. And we went up to the night, deep in the night, and we rested for a little while. And while I rested, I fell asleep. When I woke up, there was nobody around me. But I got so scared that I started running forward, knowing the road where they were going. And I caught up with them, and we went. And I joined them.
How could they have just left you there? I don't
They
understand.
didn't care.
Who's they?
It was civilian. We didn't have any uniforms. We were going at a place to get uniforms and weapons and so on. It took us quite a while to reach that place. That place was Zaporozhye. It's a very big city. It's a port in Ukrainian. After many, many days, we reached that city of Zaporozhye, which we were sent to. This was farther away from the German front. Over there, they gave us out uniforms, and I stayed with the Brasha Podolsky very close. After a short time,
Where was the rest of your family?
my rest of the family I left in Domanyovka. All of them I left in Domanyovka. We will come into that later, that I never heard from them for years. But right now we will talk about me. One day when we were in the field shooting, learning how to shoot, a starshina, which is in the Russian army a little higher than a private, came in and called my name. So I went with him. He took away my good uniform, and he gave me a bad uniform, and there was other people, lots of people brought in, and he took us out of this unit, and we had to go to another unit. We went to Dnepropetrovsk, which is on the Dnieper. There we were stationed for quite a while. We knew that the Germans already took the town which is called Domanyovki in Odessa Oblast. So I knew I have nowhere to ride, and they can never find me because they did not have any information about me whatsoever. And since they separated me from my best friend, at that time, I thought that my world is ending, that I have no choice, that this is the end of me. Finally, I started adjusting to the new place. From Dnepropetrovsk, we've been there for quite a while. In the front,
Did you wonder did you have time to wonder during the whole war? I wonder what happened to my family, or were you too busy taking care of yourself?
I never forgot my family. They were always in my mind. I also knew that there is no way I can find out what they did, because if they didn't leave that town, they are definitely dead from the German hands. But if they left and evacuated themselves, depends where they went and how far they went. If they went far enough that the Germans did not catch yet that place, they're alive. But there is a lot of ifs and maybes. So I did not know. So I was completely on my own. And I started to adjust to the situation. I used to lay in the trenches and watch every day how the Luftwaffe was fighting the Russian aeroplanes right on top of our trenches. It was a common thing. You get used to it daily, and they would not let us go see when they knocked down airplanes. However, one time they allowed us, and that was a German airplane. But the two Germans that were there were dead. And you get used to it. It's very strange how you can get used to things like this. But it's not easy. But survival is something that's in human beings, and that was in me, to survive. I was there for quite a while until the Germans came closer. And one day we went in a march again. And at that time it was raining very, very hard. It was in late fall of 1941 already. And I remember that one soldier told me, come with me, we'll find a place where to stay, because we could not go anymore. First of all, it was very muddy. The road started being so muddy. There was no asphalt or anything roads. It was very muddy, and I was very tired. And he said, come with me in the side, we will find something to stay. So we went in, and the wheat and the corn was cut at that time in the fields, and it was made up in bunches. So we went in, and we covered ourselves up under this with straw, with the wheat. And I fell asleep right away. When I woke up, I was laying like in a pond of water. And I didn't wake up until it was good enough to swim already. So I woke him up, and we started walking again. When daylight come, we have joined our unit, and we went farther. And after that, we went to another town called Morozovs. We stayed there until the Germans came in and the trenches. We were fighting very little because there was no time, because they were ahead of us. They were jumping the sons on the other side of our front, Germans. And you didn't know where you are, whether you were on one side of the front or the other. They jumped parachutes.
Uh-huh. So
I
you were
remember,
surrounded by Germans?
I was surrounded by Germans. One time, there was a major, a Russian major, and he was riding a horse. He told us that there's German in front of us, there's Germans in the side of us, and there's Germans in the back of us. We have one side, and this is woods, very thick woods. He said, if we go there, we may make it. A lot of Ukrainians didn't go, and they stayed behind. But me, being a Jew, I could not afford to do that. So I went, and he took us to the woods most of the night. The Germans had reflectors. When they put the reflectors on us, I could read the paper. That's how strong they were. In the morning, he told us we are out of danger. The Germans are behind us. And we went farther. That was quite a while that we marched and marched, we fought, but we couldn't stop the German army because they overwhelmed us.
What does it mean to fight then? You dig a trench?
To fight,
you
dig
sit
a
there?
trench, they come,
Shoot.
when they come, you shoot. But when they're behind, you cannot shoot. When they shoot from the front and behind, you cannot shoot because you don't know where to shoot first. So our commanders make sure. Our commanders made sure that we are ahead of them. They didn't want them to catch us. And the main thing was to do some damage and to leave, because we could not do much to them at that time because they were marching. And that was in 1942. 1942 was an extremely cold winter where I was, an extremely cold winter. In that Morozovs, it was called Stancia Morozovs. I got sick. And they took me to the hospital. I do not remember what hospital. I do not remember how I come there. All I remember, in the morning, I got up and I had to feel myself that I'm still alive. The nurses came in, they talked to me. I couldn't eat. I was in this hospital for quite a while. I don't remember how long. That winter was terrible.
What disease did you have?
Huh?
What was your disease?
I really don't know what the disease was. But I know for 3 days I couldn't eat, I couldn't drink. They had to feed me by liquid. But they did their job, the nurses. The doctor came in twice a day and he looked at us. And I was laying in a room, probably 12 soldiers. This particular hospital was a field hospital evacuated from Leningrad after the siege was opened in 1942. After that, I remember I was discharged from the hospital, from a doctor. And they gave us products. They gave us cards to go to the train. There was a leader that took us. There was a few. And I did not know where I'm going. And that was by the end already, by the middle of 1993. 43, I'm sorry. But I remember that I lined up in Stalingrad in a school that was called the 7th School. The schools were there by numbers. And this was the 7th School. The function of that 7th School was to take all the units which were beaten up, whoever was left, and to form other units and to send on the front. This was the function of that school. I was there for a while, not too long. And at that time, they assigned me, there was an airport not far from Stalingrad. It was called Umrak. They signed me there to be at that airport and serve the airplanes. Clean, do whatever. I was there for a long time until one night, very late at night, they woke me up and they said, come quietly because the Germans are very behind us, very, very close. We came in the morning already to Stalingrad, and it was terrible. There was a factory which made tractors, which was called STS, Stalinsky Traktorny Zavod, STZ, Stalinsky Traktorny Zavod. The German, that was 3 kilometers under Stalingrad. The Germans already reached that factory when I came in the morning. we gathered together. They made something at that time which was called воздушные заграждения. That means air defenses. They were magnetic, and they were supposed, when the Germans were flying and bombing Stalingrad, they were supposed to pull them. However, I watched them. They worked very little.